You know that feeling when you want to really get something? To dig beneath the surface of a complex topic, but maybe the idea of sifting through like mountains of information feels like a huge task.
Yeah, it can be pretty overwhelming.
We get it. That's why we do the deep dives for you. We pull out the crucial bits so you can get informed without all that heavy lifting.
And today we're diving into something pretty fascinating and honestly often misunderstood. Compulsive buying disorder?
Right, also known as oniomania or compulsive buying shopping disorder.
Yeah,
It's a mouthful.
it is, yeah. We've looked into the research, the expert viewpoints, trying to bring you the key understandings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our mission today is simple, really. We want to give you a clear picture of what CBD is all about. We'll look at its history, nail down the characteristics.
Explore the possible causes.
Yeah, understand the impact, the consequences, and importantly, look at what can actually be done about it.
Okay, let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this. So, what exactly is compulsive buying disorder?
Well, in essence, CBD is. It's this intense, persistent preoccupation with shopping and buying. It goes way beyond just enjoyment into, well, problematic territory.
Problematic how?
It's characterized by this urge, right? It keeps coming back. It feels really strong, compelling, almost like you can't resist acquiring things.
Mm.
And what's interesting
Yeah.
is that these items often don't have much practical value. Sometimes they're even pretty cheap.
Huh. And it's often triggered by negative feelings, you said.
That's a key part, yeah. Often this behavior kicks off when someone's feeling down or stressed. Negative emotions are often the trigger.
So it's definitely a significant step beyond just, enjoying a bit of retail therapy to maybe lift your spirits.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The line is crossed when this urge becomes, well, uncontrollable and starts causing real difficulties in someone's life.
Right, like actual problem.
Yeah, whether that's in their relationships, their personal well-being, or, and this is very common, their financial situation. It's now actually classified in the ICD-11.
That's the International Classification of Diseases.
Correct. As an other specified impulse control disorder. Specifically, they call it compulsive buying shopping disorder.
Okay, that makes sense. It has its own category. But I've also heard people talk about it, well, like an addiction is.
That's a really important point and honestly a bit of a debate. While lots of experts see strong parallels with addictive behaviors, that persistent urge, the negative consequences, despite knowing better.
Right.
CBD isn't currently in the DSM-5 chapter on substance-related and addictive disorders, so there's still this ongoing discussion in the field about whether these kinds of repetitive, impulsive behaviors really fit our standard definition of addiction.
Interesting. So it's recognized, it's classified, but where it fits exactly is still evolving. Now, this doesn't sound like something totally new. Has
Yeah.
it been on the radar for a while?
It actually has a surprisingly long history, though it wasn't always a major focus, the term oniomania.
Oniomania.
That was coined way back in 1892. A French psychiatrist, Valentin Magnan, was noted in the German translation of his lectures, apparently.
Wow, 1892. That's quite a while ago. What was the thinking back then? What did they think it was?
Well, Magnan saw compulsive buying as a symptom of what he called social degeneration.
Degeneration. That sounds harsh.
It does, doesn't it? And interestingly, another thinker, Max Nordau, echoed this around the same time, 1892. In his book, he called it a buying craze and even a stigma of degeneration. It really shows how societal views can shape how we see mental health and even consumer behavior, right?
Definitely. So less about the individual psychology and more about society failing somehow.
In those early days, yeah, there was a strong social angle. Then around 1909, Emil Kraepelin, another big name, he described oniomania as a pathological desire to buy without any actual need and in great quantities. He put it alongside things like kleptomania, recognizing that lack of control.
Okay, so the impulse control idea was there early on, but it sounds like it kind of faded from view after that. Why didn't it get more attention for so long?
That's a great question. The reasons are probably complicated. Maybe psychiatric research just shifted focus. Or perhaps the behavior wasn't seen as, I don't know, impairing enough or common enough back then. Hard to say for sure. But whatever the reason, despite these early descriptions, serious research interest in CBD as its own thing didn't really pick up steam until the 1990s.
The 90s, wow.
Yeah, and some even argue that now, even today, it's still sort of a barely recognized mental illness. It only got that specific classification in the ICD-11 very recently, in 2019.
So quite a journey from social degeneration to a specific impulse control disorder. That's a big shift. Okay, so let's talk about today. What does it actually feel like for someone going through this? What are the key characteristics?
Yeah. The big one is the chronic nature of it,
Yeah.
the persistence. Occasional shopping might be fine, even positive for some people. Self-expression, maybe relaxation.
Yeah.
But with CBD, it becomes this ongoing, potentially damaging pattern. And we also see what's called high comorbidity quite often.
Comorbidity. Okay, break that down. What does that mean exactly?
It just means CBD often shows up alongside other conditions, things like mood disorders, depression, maybe anxiety disorders, substance use issues too, and even eating disorders.
So it rarely exists in isolation.
Often not, no.
Hmm.
It suggests maybe a wider struggle with managing emotions or controlling impulses.
That paints a much more complex picture than just someone who likes shopping too much.
Exactly. And the research backs that up. People who score high on compulsive buying scales, they often report having trouble understanding their feelings, especially the negative ones. They might have, like, a lower tolerance for feeling bad.
And when does it usually start?
Typically, the onset is in the late teens or early 20s. And if there's no intervention, it usually becomes a chronic, long-term thing.
And is it more common in women? I feel like I've heard that.
Yeah, historically, many reports have suggested that. Some figures even went as high as over 90% women.
Wow, 90%. That seems really high.
It does. And we should be cautious with figures like that. They could be outliers. While it does seem more women report having CBD, it's really important to remember that men absolutely experience this too. We shouldn't overlook that.
Good point. Okay, you mentioned parallels with substance use earlier. Can you expand on that? What are the similarities there?
Sure. Researchers noticed several similar patterns. Things like a constant urge or craving to, well, consume, in this case, buy things. A feeling of depending on the behavior to cope.
Cope with feelings.
Exactly. And a real difficulty controlling it, even when they know it's causing problems. Negative consequences don't stop the urge.
So that urge to buy feels almost like a physical craving.
For many, yes, it seems that way. And it's important to distinguish CBD from, say, hoarding disorder.
Right, because both involve lots of stuff.
They do, but the motivation is different. With CB, the focus is often more on the act of buying, the feeling it gives you right then. With hoarding, it's more about the distress of getting rid of things, the fear of losing them.
Got it. And it's different from mania, too, though buying sprees can happen in mania.
Yes, CBD is distinct from the overall state of mania. Although, like you said, impulsive buying can be a symptom during a manic episode. But CBD is a pattern outside of those episodes.
That clarifies things. And it's not purely about the money spent, is it?
No, absolutely not. It's not just defined by overspending. It can also be about spending huge amounts of time shopping or just being constantly preoccupied with thoughts about buying, even if you don't always follow through and purchase something.
Ah, so the mental space it takes up is a big part of it, too.
A very big part. In fact, researchers talk about these 4 phases. First is anticipation, thinking about shopping, planning it.
Okay.
Then preparation, maybe researching online, figuring out where to go. Third is the shopping event itself, the actual act. And finally, the spending phase, which often brings that hit of excitement or relief when you get the item.
It really sounds like a self-reinforcing cycle. And you mentioned a buzz from the buying part specifically. Yes, and that's an interesting distinction. Buying versus shopping. We kind of use them interchangeably, right?
Yeah, I guess with you.
But buying can be quick, functional, grabbing milk, whatever. Shopping is more the browsing, the experience. And for about 30% of people with compulsive shopping issues, they report that the specific moment of purchase, the transaction itself, gives them a real buzz, a high, almost regardless of what they bought.
Just the act of acquiring it.
Seems like it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the acquisition that feels rewarding in that moment.
That's really insightful. You also mentioned links to some physical conditions.
Yes, there have been some observed associations with neurological conditions like Parkinson's disease and also frontotemporal dementia, which suggests there might be some underlying biological factors involved, or at least interacting with the psychology in some cases.
Okay, this is painting a really detailed picture. Now, the big question, why? What are the potential causes? What's
Well-
driving this?
Well, it's likely not just one thing. It's probably multifaceted, a mix of factors. Some research points towards early life experiences potentially playing a role.
Like childhood stuff?
Possibly. Also, certain personality traits seem to be linked. Things like perfectionism, general impulsiveness, compulsiveness, even traits like dishonesty or insecurity, maybe a need to feel in control.
So deeper psychological patterns might be involved?
Could be. And then there's the medical or biological perspective. Impulse control issues in general are often connected to the brain's reward system, right? That desire for positive feelings.
Makes sense.
Normally, the frontal cortex, kind of the brain's CEO, helps regulate these urges. But some studies suggest that in people with behavioral issues like compulsive buying, there might be differences in how that area functions. Maybe an issue with processing rewards or putting the brakes on impulses.
Okay, that's the brain side. What about the psychological viewpoint? What's the thinking there?
Psychologically, one idea is that it might be a sort of search for self, especially if someone feels their identity isn't very stable or secure. Purchases can become like markers, ways to define yourself or show who you are.
Like buying an identity almost.
In a way, perhaps. And also, people already struggling with things like PTSD, CPTSD, anxiety, depression, poor impulse control.
Yeah.
They might be more vulnerable. Shopping can become a way to cope, especially with low self-esteem, a kind of maladaptive coping mechanism.
Trying to buy a feeling, like self-worth.
That could be part of it for some. But, it's important to say that these psychological explanations might not fit everyone with CBD. There's probably a whole spectrum of reasons.
Sure. And what about society? Culture? Because it
Yeah.
feels like we're just bombarded with messages to buy, buy, buy.
Oh, absolutely crucial point. Social conditions play a huge role. The rise of consumer culture, especially over the last few decades, has definitely fed into this. It's why some see CBD as a kind of postmodern issue, particularly with online shopping, making it so easy.
And credit cards everywhere. That must make a difference.
A massive difference. Readily available credit makes it incredibly easy to spend money you don't have, right? It just fuels the behavior. Some experts even say, for people struggling, getting rid of credit cards might be a necessary step. And online shopping, that's opened up a whole new dimension. There's even talk of online auction addiction now, often used as a way to just escape negative feelings for a bit, like depression or guilt.
It sounds like this really complex web, individual psychology, brain function, social pressure. Wow. Okay, you mentioned diagnostic criteria earlier. What are the key things that define CBD?
Right. Several things are usually looked for. Generally, it includes this overwhelming, constant preoccupation with buying. And it has to cause significant distress or problems in daily life, finances, relationships, work.
So real impairment.
Yes. And importantly, this compulsive buying isn't just happening during, say, a manic or hypomanic episode. It needs to be a more persistent pattern.
Not just tied to temporary mood swings. Got it.
Exactly. And there's often this cycle, right? Obsessing about buying, but then feeling dissatisfied even after you buy something. The urge might start from wanting to feel better, feel special.
Yeah.
But the good feeling is temporary. So it becomes this reinforcing loop. You get a brief high from buying, then maybe disappointment, guilt, which then triggers more buying to try and feel better again.
That really does sound just like an addiction cycle.
It shares so many hallmarks, yeah.
Yeah.
As stress or anxiety ramps up, the person might try to self-medicate with more buying. But then comes the crash, shame, embarrassment, guilt, regret, maybe even depression. And easy credit just pours fuel on that fire.
And I imagine secrecy becomes a big part of it, especially as debts pile up.
Definitely. As the financial mess grows, the shopping often goes underground. People might hide purchases, even throw them away because they feel so ashamed about their lack of control, which tragically just adds to the mental and emotional burden on top of the financial one.
Such a destructive pattern.
It really is. People struggling often feel these repetitive, obsessive urges, especially in tempting environments like malls or just browsing online. And they might end up buying cheap, unnecessary stuff just to scratch that itch, just to satisfy the urge to spend.
And then maybe return it or hide it?
Often, yes.
Yeah.
Returned, hidden, discarded. And underlying all this, very often, are feelings of low self-esteem.
The consequences you've hinted at sound incredibly serious. What kind of impact are we talking about?
They can be truly devastating, rippling through everything. Marriages, relationships, jobs, they can all come under immense strain, even fall apart because of the financial stress and the secrecy.
Just the financial side alone.
Exactly. That can lead to ruined credit, maybe even theft or embezzlement, to fund the buying, defaulted loans, bankruptcy, extreme debt. It's a huge burden.
The stress must be immense.
Absolutely enormous. And all that financial stress, the emotional turmoil, feeling out of control, it leads to massive anxiety, the sense that life is just spiraling. And sadly, in some cases, it can contribute to physical health problems from the stress, broken relationships, and even, tragically, an increased risk of suicide.
That's incredibly sobering. It really highlights the severity.
Yeah.
So, okay, what helps? What are the paths to change? Are there effective treatments?
Yes, thankfully there are. The first and maybe the hardest step is becoming conscious of it, recognizing there's a problem. That often takes self-education, therapy, maybe group work.
And what does the research say works best?
Well, research, including from people like Michel Joyaux and Aviv Weinstein, really points towards cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, as being quite promising. They also stress how important it is to check for other issues, like depression, because those might need treatment too, maybe with medication alongside the therapy.
Okay, CBT, what does that involve for compulsive buying?
CBT usually focuses on helping people identify the thoughts and beliefs that are driving the compulsive buying, challenging those thoughts, and then developing healthier ways to cope with the urges, manage the negative feelings without resorting to shopping.
Learning new strategies.
Exactly. And their research found that patients in a 10-week CBT program actually had fewer buying episodes and spent less time shopping compared to people who didn't get the treatment. So that's encouraging.
That really is. What about medication? Is that used?
The evidence there,
Well,
it's more limited,
yeah.
less conclusive than for therapy. Some studies have looked at meds like SSRIs, the antidepressants. But the results for CBD specifically are pretty mixed. The general feeling among experts right now is that therapy, especially CBT, and getting support from groups, those are the most reliable ways to manage and overcome it.
So therapy and peer support are kind of the front line.
Seems that way. Actually, research by Haig and colleagues found group therapy led to the biggest drop in compulsive spending urges, about a 72.8% reduction on average for participants. They also noted that, one-on-one therapy might not be right for everyone, and treatment really needs to be tailored.
Personalized to the individual. Makes sense.
Absolutely. Now, meds like SSRIs or opioid antagonists, things like naltrexone, which is used for other addictions, they've shown some potential in early studies for CBD, but the evidence just isn't strong enough yet for widespread recommendation. Naltrexone is more established for things like gambling addiction, which has some overlap.
Okay, so the main focus really seems to be psychological and social support right now. Now, just before we wrap up, you mentioned a historical example.
Yes, a figure often brought up is Mary Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's wife.
Really?
Yeah. Based on historical accounts, it's been suggested she might have struggled with something like this. Reports describe her hiding large debts, having these intense, almost manic periods of shopping glee, followed by depressive reactions when reality hit.
Wow, that's fascinating and sad. A glimpse into how this might have looked long before we had the language for it. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's quickly recap the main points about compulsive buying disorder.
Sure, so we define it as that overwhelming, uncontrollable urge to buy, leading to negative consequences. We traced its history from those early social ideas to its current classification as an impulse control disorder.
Right, and the core characteristics.
Exactly, the emotional triggers, that cycle of anticipation, buying, guilt. We explored the potential causes too, the psychological factors, possible brain differences, and the huge influence of consumer culture and easy credit.
And we definitely covered the serious consequences, financial, relational, emotional.
Yes, very important. And finally, the treatment options. Emphasizing CBT, therapy in general, and group support as the most effective approaches currently known.
It's definitely a complex issue, isn't it? Understanding all these different facets feels really important for spotting the signs, maybe in ourselves or someone we know, and figuring out how to get help.
Absolutely. And that leads us to a final thought, something for you to maybe ponder on your own. Considering how much consumer culture seems to be ramping up and how incredibly easy online shopping is now, how do you think our understanding of compulsive buying and how we treat it might need to change or evolve to meet these modern challenges?